The medical bay smelled like burnt ozone and alien blood. Daniel Cross had spent 6 hours trying not to think about how many ways this could get worse, but the universe apparently loved proving him wrong. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across surfaces that looked organic and technological simultaneously. Vrithai design philosophy made everything seem like it was growing rather than built. Medical instruments hung from articulated arms that resembled tree branches more than machinery. Storage units pulsed with soft bioluminescence, indicating active refrigeration systems for medicine Daniel still couldn't pronounce correctly. He'd treated 17 casualties since the pirate ambush. 17 Vrithai warriors whose physiology was close enough to human that he could apply basic trauma protocols, but different enough that every procedure felt like guesswork refined through desperation. The VSS Talon's Edge limped through neutral space on auxiliary power, half her systems offline, crew scattered between damage control and emergency medical stations. Their actual medical officer had died in the first volley, a plasma breach that had vaporized the forward section before shields could compensate. That left Daniel, a human field medic on his 3rd month of an exchange program that was supposed to be educational and low risk, as the only person aboard with any medical training. He was regretting every career decision that had led to this moment. The comm unit chirped, a sound like wind chimes made from crystal. Daniel tapped it with bloody gloves. "Medical, go ahead. We're bringing Commander Vesrin to Bay 3. The speaker was Tarlvin, the tactical officer whose arm Daniel had set an hour ago. His voice carried strain. "Armor damage, critical." Daniel's stomach dropped. Armor damage, in Vrithai terms, could mean anything from cosmetic scratches to catastrophic system failure. "How critical?" "Emergency fusion protocols engaged. She's stable but deteriorating. You need to..." Static cut the transmission, then Tarlvin's voice returned tighter. "She needs you now." The comm went silent. Daniel grabbed his kit and ran. Medical Bay 3 was designed for complex surgeries, equipped with monitoring systems that could track 30 different biological markers simultaneously. When Daniel burst through the door, he found 4 crew members struggling to transfer Vesrin from a stretcher to the surgical table. She was conscious, which was either very good or very bad. Her armor, the bioresponsive shell that Vrithai warriors bonded with during elaborate ceremonies, looked wrong. Sections that should gleam with harmonious energy patterns were dark or flickering with erratic pulses. Worse, Daniel could see where the armor had begun melting into her body, organic technology and organic tissue fusing in ways that made his medic training scream warnings. "Commander," he said, moving to her side while the crew backed away to give him space, "I need you to tell me what happened." Vesrin's eyes focused on him with effort. Her pupils, normally slit like a cat's, were dilated almost round. The crystalline markings that traced from her temples down her jawline pulsed in irregular patterns, cycling through colors that Daniel's brief xenobiology training told him indicated severe pain. Her ears, long and elegantly pointed, lay flat against her skull. "Plasma hit," she managed, her voice strained but controlled. "Armor absorbed it, damaged the interface. Emergency protocols activated." She stopped, breathing hard. "It's fusing. The armor thinks I'm dying. It's trying to preserve me." "That sounds like a good thing." Daniel was already scanning her vitals, his handheld medical scanner beeping frantically as it tried to make sense of Vrithai biology crossed with malfunctioning technology. "It's not." Vesrin's hand shot out and caught his wrist. Her grip was strong despite the pain. "The damage means the fusion is wrong. It's killing me slowly instead of saving me. The armor has to come off." Daniel looked at the armor, at the way it had melted into her skin along her chest, her shoulders, parts of her legs. "How?" "Manually, each piece disengaged one at a time." Her breathing was getting shallower. "But you need to understand the risk." "I'm listening." "Vrithai armor stores and channels our bioenergy. When it's removed properly, that energy disperses safely. When it's damaged and forced off, she paused, her markings flaring bright crimson. The energy has to go somewhere. It will discharge into whoever removes it. Daniel's medical training supplied the relevant information with uncomfortable clarity. HFY bioenergy was an electromagnetic phenomenon, similar to bioelectricity in Earth species, but orders of magnitude more intense. Humans had no natural resistance to it. How bad are we talking? For another HFY, painful but survivable for a human, Vesrin met his eyes. I don't know, we don't have data. Your species doesn't naturally process bioenergy. It could, she stopped, and her expression shifted to something resigned. It could kill you. Daniel looked at her, really looked. In 3 months aboard the Talon's Edge, Vesrin had pulled him out of a hull breach he'd been too slow to avoid. Had spent hours teaching him HFY cultural protocols so he wouldn't accidentally insult anyone. Had learned to pronounce his name correctly even though human phonetics made no sense to a species whose language was half harmonics and half crystalline resonance. She'd saved his life twice. Okay, he said. Vesrin's markings pulsed in confusion. You need to contact. We're 3 hours from the nearest concordance station. Your vitals are deteriorating. You'll be dead in 2 hours, maybe less. Daniel set his scanner aside and began examining the armor seals, looking for release mechanisms. So we're doing this now. Tell me where to start. Daniel, Commander, with respect, you're not dying on my watch because I was too scared to do my job. He found the first seal, a crystalline mechanism fused to the chest plate. Where do I start? Vesrin stared at him. Her markings cycled through several colors he didn't recognize, then settled into something that might have been respect or might have been resignation. Chest plate, she said quietly. Center seal, press and rotate clockwise until you feel it release. Daniel positioned his hands on the seal. It was warm under his touch, pulsing with energy he could feel even through his gloves. This will hurt, Vesrin warned, for both of us. Yeah, Daniel said, I figured. He pressed the seal and began to rotate. The energy hit him like touching a live wire made of exhaustion itself. Daniel had been electrocuted once during training, an accident involving faulty equipment and wet floors that had left him unconscious for 3 minutes and shaking for an hour afterward. He'd thought he understood what electrical shock felt like. This was nothing like that. Bioenergy didn't hurt the way electricity hurt. It didn't make his muscles seize or his heart stutter. Instead, it drained. The moment the chest plate seal released and energy arced from the damaged armor into his hands, Daniel felt his strength simply evaporate. Not painfully, but completely, like someone had opened a valve and his vitality was pouring out. His vision blurred. His knees tried to buckle. His hands locked on the armor piece through sheer survival instinct because letting go felt like it would mean disappearing entirely. The chest plate came free with a wet, organic sound. Vesrin gasped, the first time Daniel had ever heard her make a sound of pain, as the armor tore away from fused tissue. He dropped the piece and caught himself against the surgical table, breathing hard. The exhaustion faded slightly, enough that he could think again, but it left an echo, a hollow feeling in his chest like he'd just run a marathon on no sleep. Daniel. Vesrin's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. You need to stop. Not a chance. His hands were shaking. He ignored them and grabbed the regenerative gel from his kit, applying it to the burn where the armor had fused to her sternum. The tissue was purple-black, HFY blood poisoning, bad but treatable if he could get the rest of the armor off before the toxins spread. The next piece will be worse. They get progressively. I know how cascading system failures work, Commander. Which piece is next? Vesrin studied him for a long moment. Then, with what might have been respect or might have been the acceptance of someone watching a disaster unfold, she indicated the right shoulder guard. There, same mechanism. Daniel positioned his hands, took a breath, pressed and rotated. The second discharge hit harder. His legs actually gave out this time, sending him to one knee beside the table. The exhaustion was deeper now, pulling at something fundamental, not just physical energy but mental focus, emotional resilience, everything that made consciousness possible. He held on, released the shoulder guard, treated the wound beneath. 2 down, he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. 12 more to go. Vesrin was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You understand this gets worse with each piece. The damaged armor is bleeding stored bioenergy. Every seal you open releases more. Then we should probably work faster. They developed a rhythm out of necessity. Daniel would warn her before each removal, partly courtesy, partly to give himself a moment to brace. Vesrin would grip the edge of the surgical table with both hands, her markings flaring bright as the armor tore away. Daniel would absorb the energy discharge, fight to stay conscious, treat the wound, and move to the next piece. Between removals, they talked. It started as practical communication, Vesrin guiding him to the next seal, warning him about particularly dangerous releases. But after the 4th piece, when Daniel's hands were shaking so badly he had to stop and focus on breathing, conversation became something else. A lifeline. Tell me about Vrithai armor, Daniel said, prepping the next seal. How does the bonding work? It's ceremonial. We undergo the bonding at 17 cycles, roughly 19 Earth years. The armor grows with us, learns our bioenergy signature. Her voice was strained but steady. It becomes part of us. Removing it manually like this it's wrong, violated. I'm sorry. Don't be, you're saving my life. She paused. Why are you doing this? Daniel looked at her while applying gel to the wound from the 4th removal. Because you need help and I'm here. You're risking your life for someone you've known 3 months. You pulled me out of a hull breach. That was duty. She stopped, searching for words. This is reckless. Yeah, well, humans are pretty good at reckless. He reached for the 5th seal. You ready? No, do it anyway. The 5th discharge nearly knocked him unconscious. His vision tunneled to a pinpoint, his hearing reduced to white noise. Only Vesrin's voice, sharp and commanding, pulled him back. Daniel, stay with me. Focus on my voice. He blinked until the medical bay resolved into clarity again. Still here? You're insane. I've been told. By the 6th piece, the left thigh guard, his hands had gone numb. He could barely feel the medical instruments, was operating on muscle memory and desperation. His entire body felt wrong, vibrating at a frequency that didn't match reality. Vesrin had stopped making jokes. Her markings had shifted to deep crimson, pulsing in patterns that his xenobiology training identified as severe distress. But when he met her eyes between removals, he saw something else there, determination matching his own. Talk to me, he said, preparing the 7th seal. Keep me focused. What do you want to know? Anything, everything. Tell me about your home world. So she did. Between gasps of pain and the systematic destruction of her armor, Vesrin told him about Vrithai Prime, about crystal forests that sang in the wind, about cities that grew rather than being built, about a culture that had mastered bioenergy manipulation 10,000 years before humans discovered fire. Daniel told her about Earth's oceans, about learning to swim in water so cold it hurt, about the specific way sunset looked over the Pacific, and how he joined the medical corps because someone had to help people, and he couldn't think of a better reason to exist. The 8th piece, right thigh guard, nearly ended him. The energy discharge was so intense that his legs gave out completely. He dropped to his knees beside the surgical table, gasping, seeing stars. Vesrin's hand caught his shoulder, steadying him even though she was the one held together by failing armor and medical gel. Her touch was warm, almost hot, and her voice was fierce. You've done enough. You need to stop. I release you from this. Daniel's laugh came out more like a wheeze. Humans don't really do the released from duty thing very well. Stubbornness is basically a species trait. You're going to die. Maybe. But I've already absorbed enough of your bioenergy that stopping now would be stupid. Might as well finish what I started. Vesrin stared at him like he was an equation that refused to solve correctly. Then, and this shocked him more than the bioenergy discharges, she smiled. Small, pained, but genuine. In 3 months aboard my ship, I've learned that humans are either the bravest species in the galaxy or the most foolish. I still haven't determined which. Probably both, Daniel admitted. Which piece is next? 3 more pieces removed. Daniel had lost track of which parts of the armor he'd already disengaged. Everything was blurring together into a continuous cycle of pain, exhaustion, treatment, repeat. His hands moved on autopilot, reaching for seals he could barely see, applying regenerative gel to wounds that multiplied like accusations. His entire body felt like it was vibrating at the wrong frequency. His heart would race for several seconds, then slow to barely perceptible beats, then race again. The absorbed bioenergy was wreaking havoc with every system in his body, and the rational part of his mind, the part that had survived medical training and 3 months on an alien warship, was screaming that he needed to stop before permanent damage occurred. The irrational part, which was apparently running the show now, told rational Daniel to shut up because they had a job to finish. Vesrin had stopped protesting. She'd also stopped joking. Her crystalline markings had darkened to a color Daniel didn't recognize, something between crimson and black, pulsing slowly like a failing heartbeat. When he removed the 9th piece, the right forearm guard, the energy discharge was so intense that Daniel's vision went completely white. He was aware, distantly, of hitting the floor, of pain radiating through his knees and elbows where he'd landed. The medical bay tilted sideways, and for several seconds he genuinely couldn't remember where he was or why any of this mattered. Then Vesrin's voice cut through the static, sharp and commanding. "Daniel Cross, you get up right now. That's an order." Orders he could follow. Orders made sense in a situation that had stopped making sense somewhere around the 4th armor piece. He pushed himself up using the surgical table for support. Everything hurt. His muscles were shaking so badly that he could barely maintain his grip. His coordination was shot. When he reached for the medical supplies, he knocked over 3 containers before successfully grabbing the regenerative gel. Vesrin's hand covered his, steadying it enough that he could apply the treatment to the burn on her arm. Her skin was fever-hot against his cold fingers. "You need to stop," she said quietly. 2 pieces left. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "I can do 2 more. Daniel." "Commander, with respect, I didn't come this far to quit now. 2 more. Then you're alive and I can pass out with a clear conscience." She looked at him. Really looked, her alien eyes searching his face for something he couldn't name. Whatever she found there made her markings pulse once with a color that might have been approval or might have been resignation. "The leg guards," she said finally. "Both will discharge simultaneously because the armor's trying to maintain structural integrity until the last moment. It will be worse than everything so far. Yeah, I figured. It might kill you." "It might not." Daniel positioned his hands on the first leg guard seal. His fingers were so numb he could barely feel the mechanism. "Tell me about the crystal forests." "What? On your home world. You mentioned them earlier. Tell me about them." Vesrin's expression shifted, confusion, then understanding. He needed distraction. Needed something to focus on beyond the approaching moment when his human physiology would try to process more bioenergy than any human had ever been exposed to. So she talked. Her voice filled the medical bay while Daniel worked the release mechanism, describing crystal formations that grew toward specific harmonic frequencies, forests that sang when the wind moved through them, Vrethi children learning to channel their bioenergy by matching the resonance of individual crystals. The first leg guard seal released. Energy crashed through Daniel like a tidal wave, not flowing, crashing, overwhelming, obliterating everything in its path. He felt every nerve in his body ignite simultaneously, felt his heart stutter and skip, felt consciousness trying desperately to flee. He held on through sheer stubborn refusal to let go. The guard came free. He dropped it, barely caught himself against the table. One more, he managed. Vesrin was crying. He'd never seen a Vrethi cry before, didn't know they could, but crystalline tears tracked down her face, refracting light into rainbow patterns across her darkened markings. "Daniel, please." One more. He reached for the final seal with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. "Almost done, Commander. Almost there." His fingers found the mechanism, pressed, began to rotate. Vesrin's hand covered his, and for a moment he thought she was going to stop him. Instead, she helped him turn the seal, their fingers overlapping on the crystalline surface, her touch warm with bioenergy, his cold with approaching shock. She was whispering something in Vrethi, her native language emerging as the translator failed to keep up. He didn't need translation to understand the tone. Gratitude, apology, disbelief. The seal released. The final discharge was apocalyptic. It didn't flow into Daniel, it detonated through him, a cascade of foreign energy that his human nervous system was never designed to process. Every nerve ignited. His heart stopped, restarted, stuttered. His vision went white, then black, then something that wasn't either, just absence. The armor piece fell away. Vesrin was free, and Daniel was falling, the medical bay tilting as his legs gave out completely. He was vaguely aware of Vesrin moving. She was injured, should be unconscious, but she was somehow catching him, her arms wrapping around his shoulders as his knees hit the floor. She lowered him down with impossible gentleness, and he found himself staring up at her face, at crystalline markings that blazed with colors he didn't have names for, at eyes that held something between horror and awe. Her mouth was moving. She was shouting, but he couldn't hear the words over the ringing in his ears. Other crew members were appearing, rushing into the medical bay in response to her calls. Daniel tried to tell her he was fine, that she needed to let them treat her injuries properly now that the armor was off, that someone should really check those burns before infection set in. His voice didn't work. Consciousness slipped away like water through fingers, and his last coherent thought was relief. She was alive, he hadn't failed, the risk had been worth it. Then darkness, complete and absolute. Daniel woke to the smell of antiseptic and recycled air, which was different from the organic scent of the Vrethi medical bay, which meant he was somewhere else. His brain processed this information slowly, like working through calculations underwater. He tried to sit up. His body informed him in no uncertain terms that sitting up was currently impossible and he should stop trying. "Don't move." The voice was familiar, Vesrin, but softer than he'd ever heard it. Daniel managed to turn his head, which hurt but was apparently within his body's current allowable range of motion. She was sitting beside his bed, and seeing her out of armor was profoundly disorienting. She wore simple ship-duty clothes, a gray jumpsuit that made her look smaller, more vulnerable. The burns on her arms and chest were covered with regenerative mesh, already healing based on how little discoloration showed through the transparent material. Her crystalline markings pulsed in soft amber patterns. Her ears were upright, alert. She looked tired but alive. "You're okay," Daniel managed, his voice coming out rough. "I'm alive because of you." Vesrin leaned forward, and her expression was complex, layered with emotions he couldn't parse even if his brain was working at full capacity. "You absorbed lethal amounts of bioenergy. You should be dead." "How long was I out?" 3 days. Human medical staff have been treating you. They said," she paused, "they said what you did was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." "Told you?" "Probably both." A smile flickered across her face, small and brief. "Your medical report makes for fascinating reading. Apparently, your nervous system rewired itself trying to process the bioenergy. Cardiac arrhythmia resolved after 48 hours. Neural activity normalized after 60. You're going to have residual tremors in your hands for several weeks." Daniel looked at his hands. They were shaking slightly, even at rest. "Could be worse." "You nearly died." "But didn't. You're alive. I'd call that a win." Vesrin was quiet for a long moment, her markings pulsing through several colors. The report has been filed with both command structures, human and Vrethi. What you did is spreading through both fleets. The human medic who absorbed bioenergy to save a warrior, he'd known for 3 months. That sounds way more dramatic than it was. It was exactly that dramatic. You risked your life for mine without hesitation, without calculation. Her markings brightened. Some are calling it reckless, others are calling it heroic. I'm calling it both. Daniel tried to sit up again. This time Vesrin helped him, adjusting the bed into a more upright position and arranging pillows behind his back with careful precision. "You don't owe me anything," he said once he was settled. That's what medics do. What humans do when someone needs help. Vesrin's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement or might have been disbelief. Then she stood, moved around the bed, and knelt. The gesture was so unexpected that Daniel's brain stuttered trying to process it. Vrethi didn't kneel. He'd learned that in cultural orientation. Kneeling was reserved for the most profound displays of respect, usually only performed during bonding ceremonies or when acknowledging life debts. "Commander, in Vrethi culture I owe you a life debt," she said, her voice formal but warm. "What you did goes beyond duty, beyond friendship. You gave everything, risking death to save me. That debt is sacred and will be honored." "I really don't need D. I know." Vesrin rose smoothly, her markings pulsing with colors that suggested gentle amusement. "You don't need anything. You don't want recognition. You were just doing your job." She returned to her seat beside his bed. "But the debt exists regardless of whether you accept it. That's how my people understand honor." Daniel was quiet, too exhausted to argue. His hands were still shaking, and now that he was more awake, he could feel the residual effects of the bioenergy exposure. A low-grade tremor running through his entire nervous system, like his body was still trying to remember how to function normally. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you recover. The Talon's Edge is undergoing repairs at Concordance Station Epsilon. Will be docked for at least 2 weeks. Vesrin's expression turned thoughtful. "Your exchange program technically ended when you nearly died saving me. Command has offered you transport back to human fleet operations if you want it." "Do I want it?" "That's your decision." But she paused, her markings cycling through several colors before settling on steady amber. "I've requested that if you choose to remain, you be permanently assigned to my ship. The crew has. They've been talking about what you did. How you refused to let me die even when it meant destroying yourself. It's changed how they see humans." "Changed how?" "They understand now that your species' strength isn't in your technology or your tactics. It's in your willingness to give everything for someone else without calculating cost or benefit." She met his eyes. "That's terrifying and admirable in equal measure." Daniel processed this slowly, his thoughts still moving through syrup. 3 months ago, he'd arrived on the Talon's Edge nervous and uncertain, the only human among a crew of warriors who viewed his species as interesting but fragile. Now, he was apparently a symbol of something larger, humanity's capacity for self-sacrifice, reduced to a story that would spread through Vrethi space. "I don't feel heroic," he admitted. "I just feel tired." "That's because heroism isn't about feeling powerful. It's about choosing to act even when you're terrified and exhausted, and every logical part of your mind is screaming at you to stop." Vesrin's smile was small but genuine. "You chose, that's what matters." A soft chime interrupted them. The medical bay's alert system indicating visiting hours were ending. Vesrin stood, but before leaving she placed something on the bedside table. A small crystalline object, roughly circular, that pulsed with soft blue light. "What's this?" "A focus crystal from the forests I told you about. We give them to people who have saved our lives. A reminder that bioenergy, when properly channeled, creates beauty rather than destruction." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Rest, Daniel Cross. When you're ready, we'll discuss whether you want to stay aboard or return to your people. Either choice will be respected." She left, and Daniel was alone with the quiet hum of medical equipment and the crystal that pulsed gently beside his bed, casting rainbow patterns across the white walls. He slept for another 6 hours, his body still desperately trying to repair the damage from bioenergy exposure. When he woke again, his hands were shaking less, and his mind felt clearer, though clear was relative when your nervous system had recently been used as a conductor for alien electromagnetic energy. Over the next week, Daniel learned what being a legend felt like, and he hated it. Crew members stopped him in corridors to express gratitude or curiosity, their crystalline markings flashing colors he was still learning to interpret. The human medical staff who treated him asked endless questions about what the bioenergy had felt like, recording his answers for research databases with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested they thought he was insane, but fascinatingly so. Vesrin visited daily, sometimes to check on his recovery, sometimes just to sit and talk while he underwent physical therapy to retrain muscles that had temporarily forgotten how to coordinate properly. She told him that his story had reached Earth Fleet Command, that humans across multiple sectors were discussing the medic who'd absorbed lethal bioenergy and survived. Some viewed it as evidence that human-alien cooperation could achieve the impossible. Others worried it would encourage reckless behavior in future exchange programs. "What do you think?" Daniel asked during one of these visits, flexing his hands through exercises the physical therapist had assigned. "I think you didn't do it to prove anything about humanity or cooperation or political ideology. You did it because I needed help and you were there." Vesrin's markings pulsed thoughtfully. "That simplicity is what makes it powerful. You reduced a complex ethical situation to basic compassion and acted accordingly." "You're making me sound way more philosophical than I am. I mostly just didn't want you to die." "Yes, exactly." She smiled. "That's the point." By day 10, Daniel could walk without assistance, and his hands had steadied enough to handle medical instruments again, though the doctors warned him that fine motor control might take months to fully return. By day 12, he'd made his decision about staying or leaving. He found Vesrin in the ship's observation deck, a transparent bubble that offered views of Concordance Station Epsilon and the star field beyond. She stood with her back to him, wearing her armor again now that her injuries had healed, though he noticed she'd chosen a different suit, one without the trauma of fusion protocols emergency engaged. "I'm staying," he said without preamble. She turned, her markings brightening to warm gold. "You're certain?" "Yeah, I mean, the food here is terrible and I still can't pronounce half the crew's names correctly, but..." He shrugged. "You pulled me out of a hull breach. I pulled you out of malfunctioning armor. Seems like we make a good team. A team that specializes in nearly dying to save each other. It's a niche, but someone has to fill it." Vesrin's laugh was quiet but genuine. She crossed to where he stood and extended her hand, a human gesture she'd learned, offering a handshake. Daniel took it, feeling the warmth of her bioenergy flowing steadily through her now properly functioning armor. "Welcome back to the Talon's edge, Daniel Cross. Try not to absorb any more lethal energy." "I'll do my best, no promises." 3 months later, Daniel was settling into his role as the ship's permanent human medical officer when word came through official channels. His actions had been formally recognized by both Earth Fleet Command and the Vrethi Defense Council. Citations, commendations, official documentation of the incident that would live in military archives forever. He read through the reports once, filed them away, and returned to his actual job, treating injuries, updating medical protocols for human Vrethi cooperation, and occasionally sitting with Vesrin in the observation deck to watch stars streak past while they talked about nothing important. The legend continued to spread, the story refined through retelling until it became something almost mythological. The human who'd absorbed bioenergy to save a warrior, the medic who'd given everything for an alien he barely knew. proof that humanity's power lay not in weapons or technology, but in the simple, devastating courage to care beyond boundaries. Daniel heard the stories sometimes, whispered in corridors or discussed in mess halls, and barely recognized himself in them. The legend described someone heroic and fearless. He remembered mostly being terrified and exhausted and too stubborn to quit. But Vesrin told him once, during a quiet conversation in Medical Bay 3, the same room where it had happened, that maybe that was exactly the point. Heroes in stories are fearless, she said, examining the room where her life had been saved through one human's refusal to calculate acceptable losses. But real heroism is being terrified and acting anyway. You were scared. Your hands were shaking. You could barely stand by the end, and you still didn't stop. I couldn't let you die. I know, her markings pulsed soft gold. That's what makes the story true. Years later, when Daniel had returned to Earth for a brief visit and found himself at a military ceremony honoring cross-species cooperation, he stood on a stage while officials described his actions aboard the VSS Talon's Edge. They talked about bravery and sacrifice, and the bonds that formed between humans and aliens when both sides chose compassion over calculation. He accepted the recognition with appropriate humility, gave a brief speech about how honored he was, and thought mostly about how much he wanted to get back to his ship and his actual job, and the crew who'd stopped seeing him as a legend, and had returned to just seeing him as Daniel, the medic who still couldn't pronounce half their names and who made terrible jokes during medical procedures. On the transport back to Concordance Space, he received a message from Vesrin, just 3 words: "Come home soon." Home, not Earth, but the Talon's Edge, a Vrethi warship where a human medic had once absorbed lethal amounts of bioenergy and survived, where a commander had knelt in recognition of a life debt, where legend and reality had collided and left behind something simpler and more profound than either. Friendship forged through mutual willingness to give everything for each other. Daniel looked at the message for a long time, then typed his reply, "On my way." The transport jumped to faster than light, and the legend of the human medic continued spreading through both fleets, refined, retold,